Three Tacoma police officers cleared in death of a black man. The officers were charged over the 2020 death of Manuel Ellis, who pleaded, "I can't breathe," after police punched and restrained him. What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name's Simon Hill, black American from Louisiana, filming this video while living in Budapest, Hungary. And today we're talking about the story of Manuel Ellis that happened in Tacoma, Washington. Now, a lot of people, unfortunately, on my channel don't know basic geography, so we always start off with a map. This is a map of the continental United States. Washington is this very large state in the Pacific Northwest up here. It's bordered by Idaho to the east, Oregon to the south, and Canada to the north. The largest city is Seattle right here. The city that we're going to be talking about today is Tacoma, which sits right in between the capital Olympia with Seattle to the north of it. And Tacoma, for purposes of our video, is a very diverse city, but as we see right here, the racial makeup of Tacoma is that it's about 64% white and 12% black. So let's get into the story of Manuel Ellis. This was written for the New York Times by Yan Zheng, published on December 21st, 2023. In the photo right here, we see Manuel Ellis's mother, Marcia Carter Patterson, was escorted out of court by the family's attorney, James Bible, and other family members after three Tacoma police officers were found not guilty. Rest in peace to her son. Prayers to her. I wish her all the best. A jury found three Tacoma police officers not guilty on Thursday of all criminal charges in the death of Manuel "Manny" Ellis, a black man who died in police custody in 2020 after pleading that he could not breathe. One officer, Timothy Rankin, was acquitted of first-degree manslaughter. The other two officers, Christopher Burbank and Matthew Collins, were acquitted of charges of second-degree murder. All three had pleaded not guilty and had faced up to life in prison. Officers Burbank, 38, and Collins, 40, are white. Officer Rankin, 35, is Asian. The prosecutors accused the three police officers of using deadly force on Mr. Ellis, 33, while arresting him on March 3rd, 2020, when they punched him, squeezed his neck, pressed on his back, and placed a hood over his head. Prosecutors said that audio footage captured Ellis saying he could not breathe. His death occurred just 3 months before George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. Mr. Floyd, who is also black, had also pleaded "I can't breathe" as a police officer knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes. Bob Ferguson, the Washington Attorney General, said in a statement on X, "I know the Ellis family is hurting and my heart goes out to them." Family members said Mr. Ellis was the father of an 11-year-old son and an 18-month-old daughter. A musician at his church, he played drums with the worship band earlier on the night he was killed, the Attorney General's office said. Later, Mr. Ellis was walking home after getting a late-night snack at a 7-Eleven when he came upon officers Burbank and Collins sitting in their police car, prosecutors said. Mr. Ellis stopped and spoke briefly to the officers in an encounter that witnesses described as peaceful and respectful, prosecutors said. Mr. Ellis then began to walk away, prosecutors said. According to witnesses, Officer Burbank swung open the passenger door, hitting Mr. Ellis from behind and knocking him to his knees. Officer Burbank then got on top of Mr. Ellis, prosecutors said. Bystander videos, a doorbell camera with audio and video, and dispatch radio traffic captured what happened next, prosecutors said. Officer Burbank wrapped his arms around Mr. Ellis, lifted him into the air, and drove him down onto the pavement, hitting him with one of his fists, prosecutors said. Wow. Officer Collins then moved toward Mr. Ellis and brought his weight down on him, prosecutor said. Why did they keep on writing prosecutor said in here? I feel like the New York Times didn't actually care about writing this article well, because they keep on repeating this phrase. Of course, you have to say prosecutor said this to avoid criminal liability. You know, if the perpetrators of this crime or the accused of this crime want to sue the newspaper for libel or slander or whatever, but it could have been formatted in a way that it's not so repetitive when you're reading it out loud or even in your mind. I'm continuing here. So Officer Burbank fired a taser at Mr. Ellis, prosecutor said. I'm going to take a shot every time I say that. And he, with Officer Collins, held Mr. Ellis's arms behind his back and pressed down on his body as Mr. Ellis began to scream and writhe. On a nearby doorbell camera, Mr. Ellis is heard saying, "Can't breathe, sir, can't breathe." Officer Rankin, who was among a group of officers who responded as backup, got on top of Mr. Ellis almost as if in a seated position, prosecutors said, as Mr. Ellis repeated, "I can't breathe." Prosecutors said that Officer Rankin later said that he heard Mr. Ellis say in a very calm, normal voice that he could not breathe, to which he responded, "If you're talking to me, you can breathe just fine." An officer put a spit hood on Mr. Ellis's head while he was hog-tied on his stomach, and Officer Rankin was applying pressure to his back, prosecutors said. He remained in that position for 6 to 9 minutes until the fire department arrived and was pronounced dead at the scene, prosecutors said. The Pierce County medical examiner ruled Ellis's death a homicide caused by oxygen starvation due to physical restraint, with methamphetamine intoxication and a heart condition contributing factors. Lawyers for the defense argued that it was the latter two factors that caused Mr. Ellis's death and said that Mr. Ellis fought the officers with extraordinary strength, which justified the aggressive tactics they used to subdue him, the Seattle Times reported. The account, however, was contradicted by two witnesses, who prosecutors said described what appeared to be a calm conversation between Mr. Ellis and the officers. The witnesses said Mr. Ellis seemed to be walking away when Officer Burbank swung open the passenger door, knocking him down, according to prosecutors. Prosecutors said the audio and video evidence from several sources showed Officer Collins punching Mr. Ellis's head and wrapping his arm around the front of Mr. Ellis's neck and locked his hands together while squeezing, applying a lateral vascular neck restraint. So I have to say this. They haven't mentioned it in the article yet. I did not read this article before starting this, but I have to say, if you have a conversation with a police officer, in America, we have the freedom of speech. And if you just have a conversation with that person, there's no reason for you to walk away from that officer and for them to then kick you in the back or knock you down for anything. If this was really a justified homicide, by the way, the police don't have the right to be judge, jury, and executioner for somebody that's accused of a crime. The only time they can kill people is when that person is threatening the officer's life. But if these two had a conversation or an exchange, or Mr. Ellis said something to the officers that they didn't like and then they decided to attack him, that's absolutely wrong. And I believe possibly that's what happened here. But you have the right generally to insult somebody and not to be physically assaulted. I can go up to some people and, have a disagreement with them, have heated words of exchange, but that does not give anybody the right, an officer or a citizen, to beat me up and then kill me. So I'm wondering what was the motivation, because they never said that he had a warrant, that he was under arrest. They said they found methamphetamine in him, so maybe he was a drug addict. But just like how they did George Floyd, and they said, oh, George Floyd didn't die from Chauvin's knee on his neck. He died from methamphetamine. Well, up until that point, he was just fine. But maybe that knee on his neck exacerbated the strain that was already on his heart caused by his drug addiction. But just like how I smoke cigarettes, I drink alcohol, and if somebody were to stab me in the heart and then I have heart failure, you can't then come up to me or my wife or anybody who loves me and say, oh, you died or almost died because of your drinking and your cigarette consumption, because of your bad heart. No, maybe it's because of the knife that you put in my heart that caused that to happen. But still, all in all, and that's the end of the article. So really, there's no more information after that. I just read the entire article, and the only reason that they give for killing Manuel Ellis was just because he said something mean to them. Is that it? Is that what a black man's life is worth? You say something negative to a cop, and three of the officers can get out of the car, kick you in the back, put a spit bag over your head, sit down on your back until you are strangled, and then you die from asphyxiation. Is that how America's operating now? See, this is the thing, man. This is the thing. Every few days, I think about, should I leave Europe? Should I go back to America? Should I make it a better place? But then I turn on the news, and the same places I'm thinking about going. Literally, last week, I was looking up Tacoma, Washington, and it has a lot of the nice things that I want in my life. It's close to the coast, big major city, a lot of black people, mountains, beautiful nature, US dollars. Oh, that sounds great. Then black man gets killed by the police because they sat on his back and put a spit bag over his head and choked him out. Okay, all right. Well, dreams deferred. Anyway, this is not the the only story I want to read about Tacoma today, because even as tragic as it is, we have to realize that these racist events that happen in America's history are not happening in a vacuum. So I have a text I want to read here about how black Tacomans were excluded from buying homes for a long time in the city, and the city in Tacoma, Washington, even though Washington is a pretty liberal place, pretty blue state, they still are victims. No, they're still perpetrators of white supremacy and anti-black racism in their history. So let's get into this article right here. All the links will be in the description. How Racism Kept Black Tacomans from Buying Houses for Decades. This was published on December 1st, 2021 for this website, which you can find in the description. Here's the title under this text. The federal government commissioned maps in the 1930s that pointed to areas considered safe bets for home loans. The most desirable neighborhoods were exclusively white. Tacoma had its map. So, honorably discharged after serving in the Korean War, the young man looked to settle down in Tacoma with his wife. If only they could convince someone to show them a house. If they got to a house first, the real estate agent would leave upon seeing them. They learned to park down the street and wait for the agent to approach the house. Then they'd make their move, drive up and catch him between his car and the front door of the house so he couldn't leave. But even that hadn't landed them a home. The ex-soldier was Harold Moss, who one day would become the first black mayor of Tacoma and president of the Tacoma NAACP. Wow. See, this is the thing about our ancestors, man. They dealt with so much racism, so much anti-blackness that was blatant in their face. Literally, this man was a soldier, a veteran. America sucks the dick of every single soldier, yet and still when black soldiers came home, what? They couldn't even buy homes, no access to the GI Bill, treated like dogs, treated worse than the Nazi soldiers who were captured. Ain't that insane? But yet and still we rise. No matter what the white supremacists throw at us, yet and still we rise. This man couldn't even buy a house and ended up becoming the mayor of Tacoma. God, I love black people. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. His then wife, Bill Moss, what type of wife is named Bill? How you got a wife named Bill? Is that short for Billina? No, you just call her Bill. I can't be at the house saying, "Hey, Bill, can you make me a sandwich?" I'm sorry. Let me stop. All right. His then wife, Bill Moss, years later would become the first executive director of Planned Parenthood of Pierce County. But in the 1950s, they were just another black couple fighting discrimination in an uphill battle to buy a home in Tacoma. We felt blackballed, Bill Moss said in a recent interview. Like many African Americans across the nation, the Mosses were victims of redlining. So here's Harold Moss right here. I guess he's still alive and kicking. This was written back in, 2021? So he might still be around. Shout out to Harold Moss, OG, big OG. Harold Moss is retiring from city council. He has been heavily involved in Tacoma's civic life for over 5 decades. About the University of Washington campus in Tacoma, he said, "We've only just begun. We've got 46 acres here. If you think it's beautiful now, just wait." Photo taken December 21st, 2004. All right, I hope he's still kicking. All right, so under the practice of redlining from decades past, banks typically lent out to white people in certain neighborhoods. Immigrants and people of color, as well as many who lived near them, were largely excluded from the housing market and denied the equity, financial security, and generational wealth that home ownership provides. On maps that lenders and real estate agents used, some neighborhoods were redlined, literally marked in red, to designate them as the city's least safe housing investments. Neighborhoods with apartment buildings, widely varying construction styles, or a general rundown appearance were seen as poor returns. But in the eyes of many of the country's bankers, nothing downgraded as an otherwise acceptable neighborhood like the presence of black families. Records from the time show over and over again. Nativism and racism is at the heart of the grading and the theory behind the grading, said Robert Nelson, a graduate of University of Puget Sound and director of the Digital Scholarship Lab with the University of Richmond. Codifying racism. The maps came out the Great Depression. In the early 1930s, the federal government sought to encourage homeownership by giving middle and working class families access to long-term loans, said Ladale Windling, assistant professor of of History at Virginia Polytechnic Institute. Because of the Fed's backed no, pardon. Because the feds backed the loans, Windling said, with that guarantee comes the prospect that the federal government may be on the hook for that mortgage and that house. They may have to foreclose and resell. To which to show which neighborhoods in the cities were safe investments and which were not, the government set up the Home Owners Loan Corp in 1933. The agency created what became the Red Line Maps. See, I hate when people say, oh, America has never been institutionally racist. Literally, the government carved up neighborhoods in major cities across America and said, these are good places where we can give government-backed loans. So people could apply for these government-backed loans. Oh, but guess what? The loans were only for white neighborhoods. What type of shit is that? What does that tell you about America's history? Literally, they were giving stuff to white people for free. Literally, all you had to be was white, male, straight, and you could get a home for free, or the government would back the loan in the best neighborhoods for you. In the best neighborhoods, they created a whole corporation, gave out subsidized government loans to people to move into any neighborhood they want, as long as they were white and as long as you qualified for the loan. That's crazy. That's literal institutional racism. More and more checks just hit the boxes. Every time I learn something new when I do one of these stories, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Decades later, researchers discovered dozens of red line maps in the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. They have been digitized and put online by a collaborative project called Mapping Inequality, led by Nelson and Windling. Tacoma's map is among them, showing red line neighborhoods in the Hilltop, McKinley Hill, and South Tacoma neighborhoods. The neighborhoods continue to bear the marks of a racist past. A condemned house in the Hilltop neighborhood of Tacoma, Washington. The legacy of the redlining maps commissioned by the federal government can be seen in some of the city's neighborhoods today, David Montesino said. All right, so U.S. Census data shows people living in formerly redline neighborhoods earn far less, are less likely to have college degrees, and are far less likely to own homes, whose value is a large part of a family's financial worth. Federal data shows white families today have nearly 10 times the net worth of black families. Two census tracts in Tacoma illustrate these disparities. A top-rated tract in the North End and a hazardous tract on the Hilltop. In the North End neighborhood, the median household income is nearly $91,000 a year. So the North End is the ritzy place where historically only white people were allowed to buy. In the Hilltop tract, that was historically black or meant for minorities who were considered undesirable and where the government marked it out as having, hazardous areas or undesirable blighted areas. It was $17,000. See, this is the legacy of the historic racism that happened in America. The richer neighborhoods, $91,000 a year in medium income. In Hilltop Tract, it's $17,000 a year. Hell, I could live in Hilltop with that. And I'm a broke-ass English teacher. Ain't that crazy? I could live in the Hilltop Tract. See, it's insane what's happening in America, or what has happened and continues to transpire. And people don't see this as a problem. Not enough people see this as a problem. About 80% of the homes in the North End community are occupied by their owners, compared to about 5% on the Hilltop. Half of the North End residents over age 25 have completed a college degree. On the Hilltop, it's 10%. Those who live in areas once deemed hazardous can have life expectancy Those who live in areas once deemed hazardous can have life expectancies decades lower than those in what were considered the best neighborhoods, data from the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department show. Again, the two tracks show stark differences. Babies born into North End families are forecast to live more than a decade longer into their 80s than those born to families who live on the Hilltop. Another lingering effect of redlining is the level of home ownership by African Americans. At the dawn of the Civil Rights Movement, about 40% of black families in the United States own their homes. Decades later, that figure is largely unchanged, whereas about 70% of white families own their homes today, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Many African Americans and other people of color have no family members who have ever bought a home and didn't grow up talking about owning one, said University Place real estate agent Carlos Watson. Mentally, they don't think they can own a home, said Watson, who was among the first generation of his his African American family to own a home. They think all I can ever do is rent. All my parents did is rent. After getting a real estate license 2 years ago, Watson has taught first time home buyers, many of them people of color, what it takes to buy a home. Often their parents or grandparents never owned a home, he said. I don't know if it's something that's been programmed in their minds, he said of his students. I'll ask them and they say, well, I never really thought about it. Though redlining has been illegal for decades, racism in real estate continues in more subtle patterns. Today, some agents show black families like hers homes only in certain neighborhoods in a practice called steering, said Linda Hurley Isham, an urban studies senior lecturer at the University of Washington, Tacoma. She studied the effects of redlining in the Puget Sound area. Most faculty members on this campus, even administrators, live on the north end, she said. When a new faculty member of color comes to the area, they are shown, not the north end, they are shown University Place and Fircrest and Northeast Tacoma. It may be the realtor feels the buyer will be more comfortable where there is a neighborhood with more diversity. I don't know. Listen, man, that's racism. You know, if a black professor comes or a Hispanic professor comes or some other minority and you're the real estate agent and you try to say, oh, you know, there's great houses over here in the historic, jazzy black area of Tacoma or something like that. I'm going to send you over to Hilltop, not to the north end where it's surrounded, where the houses are much better, where the property values are much higher and you can generate more wealth. We're going to steer you in that direction. I never shared this on my channel, but a long time ago I had my real estate license in Florida, and I did the classes and I learned that, you know, steering is a big no-no in real estate, at least in Florida. And if they find out you're doing it, they could take your license actually. So I hope the same law applies in Washington as well. I'm going to continue here. Who sent you here? 4 decades after the red line maps were created, bankers, landowners, real estate agents, and neighbors worked together to decide who got loans or who could move to their neighborhoods. The Mosses ran head on into that attitude. To overcome it, they sometimes had to resort to creative tactics to even meet with a real estate agent in hopes of seeing a home they might buy. When you called a real estate officer, you used what I call your white voice, Harold Moss said, sharing his strategy for roping a white real estate agent into showing a home. If the couple managed to get inside a house, he said, the owner's excuses would fly. They would hate me if I sold this house to a Negro, or I don't think you could get a loan. Wow, that's insane. Well, that's the type of racism they were dealing with back in the day. They would say, listen, man, I'm sorry, but the people I represent, they would be so pissed at me that I sold this house to your black ass. That's insane. That's insane. That's what our ancestors are dealing with, and they fought and they put up with it because they wanted to chart their own destiny and live their own lives. You know, there are some people who would say, you know, why would you go and try to beg and plead and humiliate yourself to go and live with the white folks? Why would you do that? We have the right on this planet, especially as Americans, especially as black Americans, right? We have the right to go anywhere we want in our own country because we built the whole thing from our backs. So yeah, we can live in white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, Latin neighborhoods. We can do whatever we want. And I don't want anybody on my channel spitting those stupid talking points like, I'm not going to go where I want it. Nigga, I'm going to go where I want. I don't care who wants me there. I'm going to go where I want. So shout out to Harold Moss and all the other big dick niggas out here who pull up where they want to pull up. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm going to jump here. Harold Moss Center raised his hand as he, along with Gerald Maul and Philip Schroeder, took the oath of office on October 13th, 1970. Mr. Moss was appointed to the Tacoma City Council in the wake of political upheaval when 5 councilmen were ousted by recall. He was the first black to serve on the city council and would run successfully in 1971 to serve until 1973. Shout out to Harold Moss once again, man. But back in the day, those glasses were horrible. I remember seeing pictures of my dad with those 1970 and 1980 glasses with the big frame. Why did they think that was fashionable? They hide your face. It looks like you have big eyebrows that are a unibrow. It doesn't make sense. I hope that style never comes back. I hope that style never comes back. I wear glasses, by the way. I'm wearing my contacts right now. But I remember the first time I bought my glasses and they had those big 1970 frame joints. I said, oh, hell no. Hell no. And I don't know why people wore them back in the day. It does not look fly. I'm continuing here. One memorable encounter happened in South Tacoma. A minister and his wife were moving out of state and looking to sell their home. It was beautiful, Bill Moss recalled, and furnished. Her and Harold Moss accounts of what happened differ slightly. It's been more than 60 years after all, but both agree they met with the neighbors in hopes of winning them over so the minister then would agree to sell them the house. The first neighbor didn't answer the door, they said, even though they could see her watching from inside the home. How could you be scared of this nerdy looking dude, man? Why would you be scared of this man and his wife named Bill? A wife named Bill. That's hilarious. I'm continuing here. Uh, at the next house, the Mosses were invited inside. All of a sudden, the front door opened and the back door opened, and in came the horde of people, Bill Moss said, and then began to tell us no. If we moved here, they couldn't sell their property, she said. They were told. Then came a flood of accusations from the white residents, Harold Moss recalled. Who sent you here? Why don't you people go where you're wanted? You're going to bring other black people here and they're going to ruin our neighborhood. I cried because it was the first time experiencing something like that, Bill Moss said, the pain evident in her voice even decades later. We have more than the down payment. You've been taught all your life if you keep yourself clean and be a nice person, people will respect you. It was a real disappointment. Hell yes, there is nothing we can do as black people to make them love us. So we might as well live our lives the way we want to. You could wear a suit all day. You could speak proper English, proper French, proper Portuguese, proper Spanish. And what will they still do? They will still disrespect black life and black expression. So we should be able to do what they want to do. And I'm glad the Harold Mosses eventually found their home, became successful in that sort of stuff. But this is the thing. This is what people tell me all the time. Well, if you didn't act like a thug, if you didn't act like a criminal, if you didn't look like a gangster, maybe people would respect you. Maybe they wouldn't call you nigger. Well, I've been called that wearing a suit. I've been called that while teaching English. I've been called that just walking down the street, minding my own business, not bothering anybody. I've been called that in every single country I've gone to, except in Hungary so far, oddly enough. But yet and still, what do people do? Continue to disrespect black life. I'm sorry I'm slipping over my words here because I'm so impassioned right now. I'm so turned right now reading this story because the more things change, the more they stay the same. This happened more than 60 years ago, and everything that they're going through, I can relate to. I can relate to because I've been in similar situations. But yet and still, if you're a nice person, which you should always try to be a nice person, be a good person. Just because the world is anti-black doesn't give us a reason to then be negative and evil towards other people. You get what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, even if we're nice, even if we're not nice, even if we're Barack Obama, even if we are R. Kelly, we are still in an anti-black white supremacist world, and we have to do our very best to maintain our sanity, our health, our happiness, and enjoy life while we have it. I hope that message is absolutely clear. All right, I'm going to jump ahead. So the Mosses were not alone in facing discrimination and finding a place to live. Even renting could be hard. Freddie Mae Barnett, a longtime member of Tacoma's Colored Women's Club, found that out when her husband was stationed at Fort Lewis in the 1950s. They were turned away from more than a dozen homes before they found a place to live, she said. Tom Dixon, a founder of the Tacoma Pierce County Black Collective, said he couldn't find a place to rent when he moved here in the early 1960s when stationed with the Air Force. Dressed in his military uniform, he rang the doorbell of one residence. She says, "I'm sorry, Sergeant, my husband and I have found someone to rent the apartment," and that was not true, Dixon said. Later, he bought a home from a black owner. "It took some effort, but I was able to succeed in buying that house in a mixed neighborhood," Dixon said. Color coded. To create the red line maps, the federal government contracted with local real estate appraisers, mortgage lenders, and developers in nearly 250 cities, including Tacoma, said Windling of the Virginia Polytechnic Institute. The maps divided neighborhoods into 4 grades. Green, the most desirable for investment. The description from federal documents states that neighborhoods had a development potential and were in well-planned areas of a city. A top-tier neighborhood in Tacoma from the late 1930s included a part of the North End with the Weyerhaeuser Mansion on North Stevens Street. Blue, considered still desirable and completely developed. They are like a 1935 automobile, still good, but not what the people are buying today who can afford a new one, according to one summary of the color guide. The Proctor district is listed partly because of a lack of deed restrictions preventing apartment buildings and the presence of some gravel rather than paved roads. Yellow included jerry-built homes, insufficient utilities or poorly maintained properties. Deed restrictions that prevented multifamily housing are not present. Homes are poorly maintained, and an infiltration of lower grade population lives there. The descriptions often refer to a working man's district in many neighborhoods of this grade. Distance from the city's center was seen as detrimental. University Place was described as one such neighborhood. Homes there were built on 1.5-acre lots. This is a sustenance homestead area and is outstanding for its production of tomatoes, according to the description. Red, considered hazardous for investment. Red areas contain undesirable population with a low percentage of home ownership. It was hard, if not impossible, to get a home loan in a hazardous district. So these are the areas here. And once again, I have not been to Tacoma if I have not made that clear. But basically, the green areas are the most desirable. They're the ones right here. Then comes blue, then yellow, and then red, right? So we can see where they were sectioning off the undesirable people. And I wonder why this area is red, red. That area is super red. Oh my God, that must be, I don't know what that is. Let's go here to this part. So, tale of two neighborhoods. Often, the only factor that placed a neighborhood into the hazardous category was the presence of a single home owned by a black family, Windling said. So the only reason an area became hazardous or red is there might have just been one black person on the block. That's it. That's all it took for that to become uninvestable and to become dangerous. And see, once again, I think this goes to show that white supremacy is not even about economic domination, because selling your home at a loss just because a black person moved in, you're hurting yourself just because of hatred, just because of anti-black racism that's been fed into your mind. And you get what I'm saying? So too many people end up in those sorts of situations. And this just hurts everybody economically. If there was no racism, we would have a much more thriving American economy, especially in Tacoma, Washington. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and it slipped my mind. I wanted to talk about the brother who was a sergeant looking for an apartment. And this goes to show that the white supremacists, they love to talk about how much they respect the military, love the military, honor the flag, and all that sort of stuff. Yet and still, historically, they treated black veterans and black soldiers hella racist. Hella racist. Brother shows up in his uniform, and the woman lies to this veteran's face, this man who put his life on the line for the country, and says, "No, I'm not renting to you, nigger." No, that's what they did. You get what I'm saying? So insane, absolutely insane. Where were we? Hold on, wait. Where did we leave off? Right here. Hold on, wait. All right, a tale of two neighborhoods. Yeah. So one black family moves in, and now it's a hazardous place to invest in. Case in point, a few square blocks of the North End were deemed the lowest grade, even though it otherwise was physically identical to a blue-ranked neighborhood that surrounded it on three sides. The area description explains why. Okay, I see. So that's why this one is hella red, even though there's a blue area around it. Okay. No, I think they're talking about this area up here. One of these areas where there's a sea of blue or red, a sea of blue around it, but then there's red in the middle. That just means there was one black person there. All right. The area description explains why. Three highly respected Negro families own homes and live in the middle block of this area facing Verd Street. While very much above the average of their race, it is quite generally recognized by realtors that the presence seriously detracts from the desirability of their immediate neighborhood. The language in Tacoma's maps shocked Nelson. "I was somewhat taken aback and surprised at how explicit that is," said Nelson, who had looked at red line maps from all over the country. "It's not subtext you have to interpret. These are accomplished professional families, and yet their race is a reason for viewing this area that is hazardous to provide mortgages to." When the maps were created, black residents made up about half of 1% of Tacoma's roughly 109,000 residents. Today, that population nears 10% of Tacoma's 211,000 people, according to census figures. It's interesting that less than 1% of the population in Tacoma was African American, Nelson said. How much those families play in those areas' descriptions is an indication of how fixated they were on race. It's remarkable. I want to make that quote absolutely clear. He was saying that back then Tacoma literally had one black person. Literally in Tacoma, they were acting this wild and racist because there was one black person there. No, I'm joking. There was 1% of Tacoma's 109,000 people. So I'm bad at math, but what is that? 1,000 people? There were 1,000 black people. There was 1,000 black people in Tacoma at that time, and they created a whole map, a whole system to say that an area is dangerous or too bad to invest in just because a few black people, literally 1,000 black people, stayed in the area. I hope my math is not wrong. 1% of 100,000 has to be what? 1,000 people. That's how crazy white supremacy is. They go this mad and this insane over 1,000 black people being in an area, which goes to show a deeper theory that I have. A lot of people say, oh, you go to these all white places and there's no racism there because there is no black people there. But if black people were to move there in mass, or even a larger amounts of them being there, what would happen? Anti-blackness would appear. Because I've seen this with my own eyes. I've seen it with my own eyes. When you go to a country and you just happen to see a group of black men walking in that country, everybody starts staring at them, laughing at them, pointing at them, stuff like that. They get followed around the stores and that sort of stuff. That's why I don't hang out with nobody. That's why I'm walking around solo, because I can't be having all that heat on me. If I got clicked up with a bunch of black dudes out here in Hungary, half my life will become hell outside. I'm joking. I'm joking a bit. But it's absolutely true. The part that I'm talking about, anti-blackness will appear whenever black people move as a unit or as a community into white spaces or homogenous areas. It does happen in every single country for all people. I'm keeping this absolutely real. This is my belief, though. Going to continue here. So, coded language and neighborhood descriptions were sprinkled throughout the document. Neighborhoods with homogeneous populations, code for all white communities that prevented minorities from living there, were viewed as safe investments. Neighborhoods with heterogeneous populations, including Italians, African Americans, or other people of color, or with apartment constructions, were considered declining or hazardous. These new rules encourage developers to include covenants for new neighborhoods to boost their value. Rules that prevented multifamily developments were seen as a boon to those neighborhoods because they restricted the supply of housing, which drove up home values. When the maps were drawn in the 1930s, parts of Tacoma were still undeveloped. In 1944, a local developer planned out the Narrowmore subdivision in the city's west end. The sweeping view of Puget Sound, the Olympics, and the Tacoma Narrows bridges have helped propel property values to about 1.5 times the city median, recent data show. The neighborhood was built with segregation in mind, which bankers at the time thought protected property values. The covenant stated in part, no part or parcel of land shall be rented or leased to or used or occupied in whole or in part by any person of the African or Asiatic descent, nor by any person not of the white or Caucasian race, other than domestic servants domiciled with an owner or tenant and living in their homes. Let's keep that absolutely clear. Let's paint that picture. There's a beautiful place in Tacoma where they zone this for housing. And what do? It has the sea, it has mountains, it has great views, all that sort of stuff. And they write in the covenant, they write in the laws, no black people here, no Asians here, unless they are working as domestic servants. Is that not institutionalized racism? I will still have white supremacists say that the racism does not exist. I will still have this happen, but the facts do not lie. History has absolved me from everything that I believe. Yes, I've always been proven right on everything that I say, because everything I say has been proven by history and what has happened before. Keeping it real. All right, Nancy and Mike Fleming bought one of these homes in the mid 1980s. She said they had no idea the land contained a racially restrictive covenant until they had already signed the papers to buy. Their real estate agent slipped the covenants to them with an "oh, by the way," she said. I said, "You have got to be kidding me," she recalled. "I certainly wasn't happy about it. I can tell you that. It just would be nice if it wasn't in there." Narrow-Moore's covenants, still present but unenforceable, were not an anomaly. Throughout the country, planners and landowners took guidance from redline maps and incorporated racially restrictive covenants into neighborhoods. Whites did not want to live near blacks, Windling said. This is not something they would be too ashamed of. This was fairly broadly accepted. In 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that such covenants were legally unenforceable. Before the restrictions affected federal mortgage lending for decades, Windling said, with loans for first-time homebuyers and those for military members through Federal Department of Veterans Affairs. The benefit for active duty and veteran military members was just what Harold Moss wanted to use to buy the couple's first home. But nobody would sell them a house they wanted to buy, and banks in Tacoma and Seattle refused to lend them money. So we decided to heck with buying a home, he said. Instead, they built from the ground up, doing it themselves. For the Mosses, building their home was a months-long ordeal across 2 states to secure financing and contractors. Many of their friends had similar trouble, so they bought lots and built their own houses. The small community of friends cleared brush from each other's property or crawled on their hands and knees through homes, hammering extra nails to secure floorboards so the floors wouldn't squeak. You were networking all the time, Harold Moss said. Your friends would help you build. It was great fun. The Mosses eventually bought a vacant lot on Hudson Drive. They'd sometimes drive to the property at night, Bill Moss said, to gaze upon this square parcel they now owned, but that was not yet their home. We never set foot on the property until one of Harold's friends wanted to see it, she said. When it came time to secure a construction loan, the couple could not get a bank in Washington to take their business. Harold Moss visited bank after bank. He said lenders would tell him black people don't pay their bills or refuse to keep up their homes. Eventually, the couple convinced an Oregon bank to lend them the thousands they needed to build their home. You just kept trying and pushing until someone says, we're interested, Harold Moss said. Decades later, he said he can see some progress on Tacoma streets. Black people live in neighborhoods where he was once told he could never buy. But anger made fresh by distant memories strained his voice. In the Pacific Northwest, the former mayor said, people had the notion they were better than the folks in the South, that we are so far from slavery that we didn't have these problems. And then he says, yes, we did. So, absolutely a great story here. Very interesting how the story ends with them building their home and the black community there. Literally 1,000 black people there came together and started building each other's homes. That's an amazing, amazing story, and we need to learn that history. Shout out to Harold Moss for overcoming all of those things and all the other pioneers in Tacoma who made that a livable place for our people. All of y'all are martyrs. Y'all are shaheed. Y'all are the best of us. Y'all are the best of us, as the Muslims say, right? And so, what I also wanted to say is that, a lot of the times we look at the U.S. and we say, oh, the problems are only down here in the country. It's only Virginia to Texas and everything in between. But the rest of the country is so not racist. But yep, what happened in Washington absolutely was textbook racism, and that's not okay. But those brothers overcame it. We should never think, oh, because I'm from New York, I'm from Washington, I won't have those problems, because Manuel Ellis had those problems. He lost his life to racist police in Tacoma who killed him for nothing. He wasn't being charged with a crime, wasn't arrested, nothing like that. They just decided to beat up a black man and kill him in 2020. It's absolutely a shame. I find this story disheartening, but I also find some inspiration knowing that we can continue to overcome. I hope that the killers of Manuel Ellis get their justice and just due in the hereafter, and I hope that the black people in Tacoma continue to stay strong and rally around each other, and we need to learn from our ancestors. My name is Simon Hill. Thank you for watching. Peace.